A very good afternoon. In fact, a very good evening to all of you friends. I'm Sanjeev Singhal, Central Council member and Chairman, Auditing and Assurance Standard Board of India. On my behalf and on behalf of my Vice Chairman, C. Vishal Bhai Doshi, we welcome you to the 87th program of the AASB for this council year. Today's topic is Special Purpose Reports and Certificate. We know that the Chartered Accountants are called upon to issue the Special Purpose Reports and Certificates. However, there are guidelines of the Auditing Standard Board which needs to be followed. And for today's webinar, we have requested CA Harshvardhan Dosa, who is an esteemed member of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India, and is a part of the audit and assurance team of CNK and Associate. Harshvardhan is a renowned speaker and has been with ICI in many of the webinars. Friends, I'm sure that these webinars are benefiting, enhancing the knowledge of the participants, and your support has been tremendous. A very large number of members have been attending these programs, even though there are unstructured CP hours. I would sincerely urge you to continue your patronage towards the program of the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India. And I wish that the program will add immense value to the knowledge of the participants who are attending it. Thank you. And I will now invite our speaker for the day, C. Harshvardhan Dosa, for his deliberation.
Thank you, Sanjeev ji, for this for the wonderful introduction. I would also like to thank AASB for this opportunity to present on special purpose reports and certificates. Back in 2016, ICAI had issued this guidance note on reports and certificates for special purpose. So many times we have seen that many of the guidances or many of the guidelines which are mentioned for this particular as per this guidance note have not been followed, or sometimes the practitioners seem to avoid or do not follow this particular guidance. This webinar is just to enhance and to understand the importance of the guidance note and why we need to follow the particular guidance note as mentioned, and the requirements which are mentioned therein. Now, one thing we need to understand is that certification assignments can no longer be taken very lightly. We need to take the certification assignments very seriously, especially when numbers are involved. And many times what happens is we have to certify certain things based on unaudited figures. Now, unaudited figures, if we are certifying something like a net worth or a turnover based on unaudited financial statements, there is always a possibility that the management may, at the time of audit, change the numbers in the financial statements. Then what will happen is the number or amount that is certified by the practitioner will be different than what is there in the audited financial statement. And sometimes it may so happen that the difference will be very vast. So what we need to understand, we need to be very careful at the time of giving any certificate, wherein we are giving certificate based on unaudited numbers as well, especially like basic things such as towards the end of the period, if the management has passed any entries, etc. All those things need to be looked at very carefully. So this is just a general disclaimer of the presentation. The agenda for today, what we will do is we will first understand the theoretical portion of what is mentioned in the guidance note. After the theoretical portion, we will go through the illustrative formats which are mentioned as part of the guidance note. And lastly, we will undertake a couple of case studies to understand whatever we have done and to see how reporting can happen in different kinds of certification and different situations. Like Sanjeev ji rightly said, many times the practitioners or the members of the institute are required to give a lot of certificates. These certificates may be based on some regulatory aspects such as income tax may require, or your indirect tax, your DGFT might require. As per foreign trade policy, certain certificates might be required. As per Companies Act, certain certificates might be required, and so on. Sometimes certificates are also required as part of the for management's internal purpose. All this time, the chartered accountants or the practitioners are called to issue certificates. Now, ICI had given a guidance note on reports on certificates for special purposes, which was issued in 2016. This particular guidance note supersedes the guidance note which was issued back in 1984. And the aim of this guidance note is to provide guidance on various issues and intricacies which are involved in the engagements to issue reports or certificate for special purposes. In fact, very recently, ICI had published this technical guide on reporting and disclosure of key performance indicators. Now, when we look at that technical guide also, it specifically mentions that the auditor or the practitioner has to report on the key performance indicators in the prospectus of a listed company. And the practitioner has to keep in mind and has to apply the guidance note on reports or certificate for special purpose as well. So this just shows the importance of certificate of this particular guidance note. Moving on, the purpose of this guidance note is to provide guidance on engagements which require professional accountant in public practice to issue reports. Now, the word that may be used in the guidance note and the word that we have used in the seminar is a practitioner. So it provides guidance to engage on engagements which require a practitioner to issue reports. Now, here the practitioner is going to issue reports on other than those which are issued in audits or reviews of historical financial information. Right. So as we know, there are two types of financial information. One would be your historical financial information, another would be your prospective financial information. And then there would also be assurance engagements. So here the purpose of this guidance note is for those reports other than which are issued in audit or review of historical financial information. It applies to all types of assurance engagements except those which are covered as per SAEs. That is your SA 3400 prospective financial information, SA 3402, which is assurance report on controls at service organization, and SA 3420, which is assurance engagements to report on the compilation of pro forma financial information. So apart from these three assurance engagements, this guidance note applies to all other assurance engagements as well. However, it is to be noted, it does not apply to any audit or review of historical financial information. So examples of these could be, a practitioner issuing certificate for net worth, a practitioner issuing certificate for for turnover, a practitioner issuing certificate to certify some related party transactions, and so on. Reports issued out here are pursuant to the audits or reviews of historical financial information are dealt with in essays and SREs. So any reports that we issue for historical financial information, those are dealt in your standards on auditing and standards on review engagements. Here, the terms report or certificate also indicate an assurance report used in compliance with this guidance note, except those which are covered in SAEs, that is SA 3400, 3402, and 3420. Before we actually move ahead with the details of the guidance note, it is important to understand certain definitions. And though by looking at the definition or reading the definition, it may seem that it is very complicated, but it is the basic things that we actually do in any certification that we are certifying. Firstly, looking at underlying subject matter, it is a phenomena that is measured or evaluated by applying the criteria. Right? Subject matter is nothing but what is it that you are going to certify. Let's say, for example, if you have to issue a net worth certificate, then the subject matter is the net worth. If you have to issue a turnover certificate, the subject matter is turnover. If you have to issue a compliance certificate, the subject matter is that law which is applicable. Criteria, second definition is criteria. Criteria is nothing but the benchmarks which are used to measure or evaluate the underlying subject matter. Now, once we have identified what is the subject matter, we also need to evaluate that subject matter based on certain criteria. There should be a certain frame of reference within which you are going to evaluate that particular subject matter. When we talk about applicable criteria, the applicable criteria is the criteria used for a particular engagement. So in any specific engagement, whatever criteria you are using is known as applicable criteria. Suitable criteria is required for reasonably consistent measurement or evaluation of an underlying subject matter. Without the frame of reference provided by suitable criteria, any conclusion is open to individual interpretation and misunderstanding. Now, we know that just to explain this particular point, we know that when we talk about net worth, sometimes the net worth as specified as per SEBI regulations may be different than banking regulations, which may be different than your Companies Act, which may be different than Income Tax Act. So even though the underlying subject matter would be your net worth, but that net worth, the criteria based on which you will identify would be the applicable law or regulation. So same subject matter, let's say net worth may be different in some certificate as per income tax, net worth may be different in some certificate as per Companies Act, or it may be different in some certificate as per SEBI regulation, and so on. If we see the next point, the suitability of criteria is context sensitive. That is, it is determined in the context of the engagement circumstances. Like we discussed, depending upon different engagement circumstances, the criteria may be different. If I'm reporting on the net worth based on Companies Act, the criteria may change. If I'm reporting on net worth based on Income Tax Act or based on SEBI regulations, then the criteria may change a little bit. Even for the same underlying subject matter, there can be different criteria which will yield a different measurement or evaluation. Like we discussed, for the same subject matter, it is possible that there can be different criteria. The suitability of criteria is not affected by the level of assurance. Now, this is very important. There are two types of assurance which we will be able to give as per this particular guidance note. We will come to those types of assurance, but the suitability of criteria will never be affected with the type of assurance that you are going to give. The criteria will remain fixed. The underlying subject matter should remain fixed, right? Suitable criteria would also include, where relevant, the criteria for presentation and disclosure. So suitable criteria is not only with respect to a particular particular numbers or particular compliance, it may also have certain presentation and disclosure norms of how certain things are supposed to be presented, etc. When we talk about subject matter information, what we are saying is the outcome of the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter against the criteria. Basically, subject matter information is after you are evaluating or measuring the subject matter against the particular criteria, you come to a particular outcome. That is the information that results from applying the criteria to the underlying subject matter. So what is the ultimate outcome for that is known as subject matter information. Subject matter information may be a statement that evaluates an aspect of a process or performance or compliance in relation to a specific criteria. For example, we can say ABC's governance structure has confirmed with so-and-so criteria during the period. Or we can say the ABC's net worth has confirmed to the criteria laid down by, for instance, for NBFCs, they are supposed to have a minimum net owned funds criteria. So ABC's net owned funds has confirmed with the criteria laid out in the so-and-so master circular. So that is what is meant by subject matter information, which is the ultimate opinion or the conclusion that we as practitioners provide. Expectations. Now, it is very important to understand what is the expectation of this particular guidance note. The guidance note does not expect the practitioner to reduce the engagement risk to zero. You see, at any point of time, there would be material, there would be some inherent limitations attached. There might be something or the other because of which the practitioner is never expected to reduce the engagement risk to zero. Now, which can also automatically mean at no point of time, even when we provide certificates or reporting certificates as per this guidance note, we are saying that we are obtaining absolute assurance. So absolute assurance is out of the picture. As per the guidance note, practitioner is not expected to reduce the engagement risk to zero, which means there is some risk at any point of time. If at any point of time there is some amount of risk, absolute assurance cannot be obtained. Now, this can be because of inherent limitations attached to the procedures performed, which would arise from first, nature of financial reporting. There can be inherent limitations because of nature of financial reporting. There are a lot of judgments which are used in the preparation of financial statements. Then use of selective testing many times as practitioners, we will not be verifying 100% of the data. We might be checking things on sample basis. So because of selective testing, the engagement risk cannot be reduced to zero. Sorry. Also, sometimes there might be certain inherent limitations of internal control. Now, whenever there are inherent limitations of internal control, it means that management may be able to override the internal control systems in place, and so on and so forth. Much of the evidence available to the practitioner is persuasive rather than conclusive. Any majority of the evidence that we will obtain is always going to be persuasive. It can never be conclusive, because many times collusion can always be involved. Oh, sorry. Because collusion can always be involved, which may make us believe that evidence is actually true, but in fact, it may not be true. Nature of procedures to be performed in a specific situation, the kind of procedures that we as practitioners would perform may not enable us to reduce the engagement risk to zero. Use of professional judgment in gathering and evaluating evidence and forming conclusions based on that evidence. Now, at any point of time when we verify, we are using judgments to identify evidence, to gather that particular evidence and to evaluate that evidence. It may not happen that we may obtain all of the audit evidence that is required. Characteristics of the underlying subject matter when evaluated or measured against the criteria. There might be some limitations when we compare the characteristics of the subject matter with the criterion. Also, the need for engagement to be conducted within a reasonable period of time and at a reasonable cost. I think all CAs will agree with this. Any engagement that we get, any certification work that we get, we have to finish within a reasonable period of time and at a reasonable cost. Many times we have seen that clients, or auditees of the measurers, they come to us at the last moment and they say, we need this certificate within the next 2 hours, or we need this certificate on the very next day. So there is always a limitation in the period of time that you have to spend. Also, they expect that the certification has to be done at a reasonable cost. Because of all these things, the engagement risk can never be expected to be zero. Because the engagement risk would not be zero, as per the objectives of the guidance note, we will only be able to obtain either a reasonable or a limited assurance. Nowhere in the guidance note, it is saying that we will be reducing the engagement risk to zero. Since we do not reduce the engagement risk to zero, we will only be obtaining either reasonable or limited assurance. The second objective of the practitioner is to express an opinion in the case of reasonable assurance, or a conclusion in the case of a limited assurance. The report also describes the basis for the conclusion. We will see this more in detail, but just to understand out here, reasonable assurance, whenever we are presenting as per reasonable assurance, we always give an opinion. Whenever we are presenting in a limited assurance engagement, we always give a conclusion. We are not expressing an opinion in a limited assurance, but in a reasonable assurance, we express an opinion. Where the subject matter information is made up of a number of aspects, separate opinion or conclusion may be provided on each aspect. Sometimes it may so happen in the same certificate, for same subject matter or different subject matter, we are providing opinion on different number of aspects. So in that scenario, we may obtain different type of assurance for different aspects. So it is possible that if we are giving 3 aspects or 4 aspects in the case, then on 1 or 2 aspects you can give reasonable assurance, and another 1 or 2 aspects you can give limited assurance. All such separate opinions or conclusions do not need to relate to the same level of assurance. Like I discussed, a couple of assurances can be on a reasonable and another can be based on limited assurance. Also, it is an objective to communicate further as required by this guidance note. In all the cases when reasonable or limited assurance cannot be obtained and a qualified opinion or conclusion in the practitioner's assurance report is insufficient. So, in the case of reasonable or an opinion, in the case of limited, a conclusion. If we feel that that is not sufficient, then as practitioners, we should disclaim the opinion or the conclusion, or we should withdraw or resign from the engagement wherever withdrawal is possible. If withdrawal is not possible, we will have no option but to disclaim the opinion. Level of assurance. Now, there are 2 levels of assurance, like we saw. There is reasonable assurance and limited assurance. As per this guidance note, we can give only these two types of assurances. So what is reasonable assurance? Reasonable assurance is an assurance engagement in which the practitioner reduces the engagement risk to an acceptably low level. Just like how when our normal audit, we reduce the engagement risk to an we reduce the audit risk to an acceptably low level. In the case of reasonable assurance for certificates, it is an assurance when we can reduce the engagement risk to acceptably low level. The practitioner's opinion is expressed in a form that conveys the opinion on the outcome of the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter against the criteria. So in this kind of opinion, you will give a positive opinion where you will mention that we have verified so and so subject matter with so and so criteria and give our reasonable assurance. Whereas in limited assurance engagement, it is an assurance engagement in which the practitioner reduces the engagement risk to a level that is acceptable in the circumstances. Again, here the practitioner is reducing the engagement risk to a level that is acceptable in the circumstance, but not reducing it to an acceptably low level. But where that risk is greater than for a reasonable assurance engagement. So here it is saying that in limited assurance engagement, the risk is higher than reasonable assurance in a form that conveys whether based on the procedures performed and evidence obtained, a matter or matters has or have come to the practitioner's attention to cause the practitioner to believe that the subject matter information is materially misstated. You may have seen, we may be giving such kind of opinion that nothing has come to our notice which makes us believe that there is a material misstatement. So that is a reasonable in limited assurance, which is kind of like a negative assurance we are giving. The nature, timing, extent of procedures performed is limited compared with that necessary in a reasonable assurance, but it is planned to obtain a level of assurance that in the practitioner's professional judgment is meaningful. So it is not that if you give limited assurance, there is absolutely no assurance only. No. In case of a limited assurance, you are giving assurance, but of course, the nature, timing, and extent of the procedures that you will be performing will be less as compared to reasonable assurance. Now, the practitioner is within his right to understand and to think that whoever is the user of the certificate knows what is meant by reasonable and limited assurance. We will also see further that actually we will mention in the certificate what is reasonable, what is limited assurance, and how we will mention in the certificate, that also we will do it. Assurance engagement can be divided based on two types. One is an assertion-based engagement, and second is a direct reporting engagement. In an assertion-based engagement, it is an engagement in which a party other than the practitioner measures or evaluates the underlying subject matter against the criteria. So let's say, for example, here an example of assertion-based would be net worth certificate. First, the net worth certificate is measured by another entity, that is the company who's preparing the subject matter, against the criteria that is mentioned as per the law regulation. A party other than the practitioner may also often presents the subject matter in a report or a statement. So that particular entity will give a statement that this is the net worth as computed by us. In some cases, the subject matter information may be presented by the practitioner. In an attestation engagement, the practitioner's conclusion addresses whether the subject matter is free from material misstatement. So herein what happens is, in this kind of a situation, if we take example of net worth, the net worth will be presented by the company or the entity. And as practitioners, we have to check whether there is any material misstatement in the net worth. That would be your assertion-based engagement, wherein the subject matter is not prepared by us. It is prepared by the client. In direct reporting engagement, it is an engagement in which the practitioner measures or evaluates the underlying subject matter against the applicable criteria, and the practitioner presents the resulting subject matter information as part of or accompanying the assurance report. Here, we as practitioners would be evaluating whatever is the criteria. Let's take an example of if a company has, or let's take an example if an NBFC has to comply with various norms. In the case there is an FD, in the case there is a foreign direct investment into the NBFC, then it has to comply with various RBI norms. So here the practitioner will evaluate what are the RBI norms applicable and he will measure that against the criteria itself. So the subject matter is what is the norms that are available, and the criteria is what is the laws and regulation. The practitioner's conclusion addresses the reported outcome of the measurement or the evaluation of underlying subject matter against the criteria. So we will evaluate the underlying subject matter with the criteria. So this is the difference between assertion-based and direct reporting engagements. Also, the conduct of an assurance engagement in accordance with the guidance note. The guidance note aims to bring out the procedural differences between a limited assurance and a reasonable assurance engagement. We will see this in further detail. Inability to achieve an objective. If any of the objectives above, we saw there were 4 objectives above, 5 objectives as usual. If any of these objectives cannot be achieved, the practitioner should evaluate whether this requires the practitioner to modify the practitioner's opinion, or whether the practitioner should withdraw from the engagement. In case the practitioner is unable to achieve an objective, it represents a significant matter which requires documentation. We will come to documentation also. We will see what all is supposed to be documented as per the guidance note. Further, there are certain ethical and quality control requirements also. These are the same ethical and quality control requirements as per para 4 and 5 framework on assurance engagement. We will see those quality control requirements when we go through the illustrative reports as well. Engagement acceptance and continuance. The practitioner should accept or continue an engagement only when the practitioner has no reason to believe that relevant ethical requirements, including independence, will not be satisfied. The practitioner is satisfied that the engagement team have appropriate competence and capabilities, and the basis upon which the engagement is to be performed has been agreed, either through establishing the preconditions are present and confirming that there is a common understanding between practitioner and the engaging party of the terms of the engagement, including the practitioner's reporting responsibilities. Firstly, when we decide to accept or continue an engagement, the practitioner needs to ensure that there is no ethical requirement which will not be satisfied, which includes independence. Also, it should not happen that the practitioner first accepts the assignments and then finds out that, all right, can we do this particular thing? Does the engagement team have the competence to do this kind of an certification? First, the practitioner needs to satisfy himself that the engagement team is competent enough to do the certification. Also, it provides the basis upon which the engagement is to be performed has been agreed. The basis has to be agreed upon, either through establishing that preconditions exist, which we will see in the next slide. What are the preconditions? And confirming that there is a common understanding between the practitioner and engagement party. So here we will probably get an engagement letter signed between the practitioner and engaging party. Preconditions for assurance engagement. The practitioner shall determine whether the roles and responsibilities of the appropriate parties are suitable in the circumstances. Right? So if the management is giving the information, the practitioner has to ensure that management is in a position to give this particular subject matter. Now, the engagement exhibits all the following characteristics. When all the following characteristics are there, we can say that the preconditions exist. So the first, underlying subject matter is appropriate. Whatever is the circumstance in which we are performing the engagement, the underlying subject matter has to be appropriate. The criteria that the practitioner expects to be applied in the preparation of the subject matter information are suitable for the engagement circumstances and exhibit the following characteristics. So the criteria should be relevant, the criteria should be complete, criteria has to be reliable, neutral, and understandable. Also, the criteria will be available to the intended users. This is a very basic thing. To whoever we are issuing this particular certificate, you need to ensure that the criteria based on which subject matter is prepared will be available to the intended users. If the intended users do not have the criteria, there is a possibility that the intended users will misunderstand the certificate. So one of the major preconditions is that the criteria should be available to the intended users. Further, the practitioner expects to be able to obtain the evidence to support the conclusion. Before we accept the assignment, we need to know that yes, we will be able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. The practitioner's opinion or conclusion is to be contained in a written report, obviously, and a rational purpose, including that the practitioner expects to be able to obtain a meaningful level of assurance. Just 1 second. Yeah. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, great. I think right, sorry. So also there needs to be a rational purpose, including whether the practitioner expects to be able to obtain a meaningful level of assurance. Now, if the preconditions for an assurance engagement are not present, then the practitioner should discuss this particular matter with the engagement party. Now, if any of the preconditions that we saw above are not present initially, first the practitioner will and should discuss this particular matter with the engaging party. Afterwards, ideally the engaging party would make certain changes because of which the preconditions would be available. But if the preconditions are still not available, and if changes cannot be made, so that is the second point. If changes cannot be made to meet the preconditions, the practitioner should not accept the engagement as an assurance engagement unless it is required by law or regulation. And if the practitioner accepts this engagement as required by law or regulation, he will have no option but either to give a qualified or a disclaimer or an adverse opinion or a conclusion. Limitation on scope prior to acceptance of engagement. If the engaging party imposes a limitation on scope of the practitioner's work in terms of proposed assurance engagement, such that the practitioner believes the limitation will result in the practitioner disclaiming an opinion or a conclusion, then the practitioner should not accept such an assignment as an assurance engagement unless it is required by law or regulation. So this is very similar to audit. Even in audit, whenever the preconditions are non-existing, if the auditor believes that because the preconditions are not existing, and if the auditor accepts the assignment, then he will be disclaiming an opinion. In that scenario, we should not accept an audit. Similarly, even for certification, we need to do this particular analysis before accepting any assignment. Sorry. Then coming to agreeing the terms of engagement, the agreed terms of the engagement should be specified in sufficient detail in an engagement letter. I just want to know after the end of the session how many of practitioners actually obtain an engagement letter for every certification that we do. So for every certification, you need to first have agreed terms of engagement. The practitioner should communicate in writing the agreed terms before commencement of the engagement to help avoid misunderstandings. Now, why to help avoid misunderstandings? Because we will include certain things in the engagement letter which may be obvious to us, but may not be obvious to the client. So the terms of the engagement at a minimum would include the following details. First, what would be the objective? What would be the scope of the engagement? Also, what would be the responsibilities of the practitioner? What would be the responsibilities of the engaging party? So of the management, what will be the responsibility? What would be the responsibilities of the responsible party if the responsible party is different than the engaging party? Sometimes it so happens that a holding company has appointed us to do to provide a certification on the subsidiary company. So in that situation, the responsible party of preparing the particular what do you say? Just 1 second. The particular subject matter. Yes, the responsibility of preparing the particular subject matter would be of the subsidiary company, whereas the engagement party would be different, would be a holding company. So if there is such kind of scenario is there, then we should clearly identify what is the responsibility of the practitioner, what is the responsibility of engaging, and what is the responsibility of the responsible party. Also, in the engagement letter, identify the criteria which is to be used based on which we are going to evaluate the subject matter. Next, identification of the subject matter, including reference to law or regulation of the contract. So here, if I can just give a link to a normal audit that we do, your identification of suitable criteria would be similar to identification of the applicable financial reporting framework in the case of audit. Just like how in audit we identify whether AS is applicable or Ind AS is applicable or Companies Act is applicable, or if it is a non-corporate entity, whether it is level 1, 2, 3, 4. Here also we need to identify what is the suitable criteria. Also, in the engagement letter, it should be mentioned unrestricted access to whatever records, documentation, or other information requested in connection with the engagement. The fact that engagement cannot be relied upon to disclose errors, illegal acts, or other irregularities. This also needs to be mentioned in the engagement letter. Reference to the expected form and content, and a statement that there may be circumstances in which report may differ from the expected form and content. First, we should give a reference to expected form and content. Ultimately, what is the purpose of engagement? What opinion will we actually give? And then we also need to mention a statement that there may be certain scenarios or certain circumstances in which a report may be different than the expected form of content. All right. Now, this is a very practical case that we have seen so many times. When the assurance report format is prescribed by law or regulation, many times clients will come and say that no, we want the certification in this format only. We understand ICAI has issued a particular guidance note, but we don't want certificate in that format. We want in our format because the law requires us to take the certificate in this particular format. So the guidance note has specified what is the procedure that we need to perform when such kind of scenario happens. So when law or regulation prescribe the layout or wording of an assurance report, the practitioner would need to evaluate first whether the intended users might misunderstand the assurance conclusion, and if so, whether additional explanation in the assurance report can mitigate the possible understanding. If law or regulation has specified that this is the format, this is the layout that you need to use, there cannot be any modifications, then we as practitioners would first evaluate whether intended users might misunderstand and whether additional explanation in the assurance report may mitigate this possible misunderstanding. Further, if the practitioner concludes that additional explanation in the assurance report cannot mitigate the possible misunderstanding, or as the law or regulation does not allow the practitioner to provide additional explanation. So either I give additional content which may mitigate the misunderstanding, or the law regulation does not allow me only to do any changes, then the practitioner should not accept the engagement unless required by law or regulation. So if neither of this is possible, as practitioners, we should not accept such an engagement unless law or regulation requires, such that this particular certification can be given only by the statutory auditors. All the procedure is not over. Then law or regulation did not allow, or we want to make modifications. When practitioners is required to issue an assurance report under the applicable law and regulation, he should discuss the matter with the engaging party first. The practitioner should provide a draft of the assurance report that duly incorporates the essential elements thereof as prescribed. So first we create a draft. We would incorporate in that draft what is required as per the law or regulation. Both the practitioner, us, as well as the engaging party should agree on the resulting modification to the layout or the wording which is prescribed in law or regulation. Once we have provided a draft, both practitioner and engagement party should agree that yes, this is the modification and ultimately this is what we can certify. Then the agreement on layout or wording of the assurance report should be duly documented in the engagement letter. If not the engagement letter, then this agreement on layout or wording should be documented somewhere, but it has to be documented. The practitioner should then accept and perform the engagement. So before accepting and performing the engagement, we need to agree with the engaging party on what would be the layout or the wording of the assurance report. The practitioner should then accept and perform the engagement and issue the final assurance report, duly incorporating therein the essential elements as prescribed in the guidance note. If the engaging party does not agree to the approach, then the practitioner should consider whether it would be appropriate to accept the assignment. So if the engaging party does not agree with the approach that is mentioned in the guidance note, then consider, should we be accepting the engagement or should we not be accepting? Now, it may also happen that the concerned authorities reject the aforesaid assurance report issued by the practitioner on account of modifications made to the prescribed layout. many times we have seen when the concerned authorities want a particular certificate in their format only. So even if we make any minor modification, they will be like, no, we will not accept it. This will not work, and they will reject it. So if they reject it, if we have given as per our modification, and then the law regulating party has rejected the particular wordings, in such circumstance, the practitioner should obtain the evidence of rejection. Obtain the evidence of rejection, show that this particular document, that this particular format that we had issued was rejected of the assurance report by the concerned authority, and make it as part of the engagement documentation. As part of your documentation, you need to have this particular evidence of rejection. Then the practitioner in such a case may issue the assurance report in the format prescribed under law and regulation. After we have documented the rejection, then we may issue the assurance report in the format that is prescribed. Since the practitioner would have complied with the requirements of this guidance note while issuing the certificate in the first instance. In the first instance, we complied with, so we can issue this particular format. Also, the practitioner may consider enclosing a statement containing essential elements of an assurance report as prescribed in para 80, which are the elements of assurance report of this guidance note, to the format prescribed under law and regulation. Now, this is the most basic and most common thing we can do. We can have our guidance, our report in a separate letter, and whatever is required by the concerned authority can form part of an annexure to the main certificate that we are issuing. The enclosure should also state the fact that a report issued earlier in accordance with this guidance note had been rejected by the concerned authorities. So then what we should do, we should have a 2-page or 3-page or our report, which is as per this particular guidance note, and whatever is the format of law or regulation, that should form part of an annexure, which would be annexure to this particular main report. And in the main report, we need to specify that earlier it had been rejected by the concerned authorities. Now, if rejections might have occurred in the past, or where the concerned regulator has expressly indicated that any modification to the layout of the wordings is not acceptable, and if the time period available to follow the process is not sufficient. So here, if earlier rejections have happened and the concerned regulator has expressly stated and indicated that if any modification happens, the same will not be acceptable. And if the time period available to follow is not sufficient, like we already saw that many times it will happen that certification will come at the very last moment. So there might not be sufficient time to first give a draft report and then get it rejected and then ultimately give a final report. Then the practitioner may issue the assurance report in the format prescribed in the law and regulation. If the practitioner has complied with all the requirements of the guidance note, the practitioner should also enclose a statement containing the essential elements of an assurance report as prescribed. So include a statement which includes the essential elements as per this guidance note to the format prescribed under law and regulation by giving a suitable reference of the statement in the format. So in the format also you mentioned that we have given a statement dated so and so. So in that particular format, leave the format as is. Additionally, you can write, for example, in terms of a statement of the event dated so and so, or to be read with the enclosed statement of event date. And in that statement, you should have your full reporting as per this particular guidance note. Professional skepticism, judgment, and assurance skills and techniques. The practitioner shall need to plan and perform the engagement with professional skepticism, recognizing that circumstances may exist that may cause the subject matter information to be materially misstated. Also, he needs to exercise professional judgment in planning and performing the assurance engagement, including determining the nature, timing, and extent of procedures. Here, the practitioner shall determine the nature, timing, extent of procedures, which will vary if we are obtaining reasonable assurance or limited assurance. Also, the practitioner should apply assurance skills and techniques as part of an iterative systematic engagement process. Fine, this is just basic planning. The practitioner should also plan the engagement so that it will be performed in an effective manner, including setting the scope, timing, and direction of the engagement, and determining the nature, timing, and extent of planned procedures. The practitioner shall also determine whether criteria is suitable for the engagement circumstances, that the criteria is suitable for the underlying subject matter. If it is discovered after the engagement has been accepted that one or more of the precondition is not present, then practitioner should discuss the matter with the appropriate authority and determine whether the matter can be resolved to the practitioner's satisfaction, or whether it is appropriate to even continue the engagement, and whether, and if so, how to communicate the matter in the assurance report. The practitioner would need to consider withdrawing from the engagement if withdrawal is possible. So if withdrawal is possible and we come to know that a particular precondition does not exist, then the practitioner may consider withdrawing from the engagement. Also, if the practitioner continues with the engagement, the practitioner should then express a qualified adverse or a disclaimer of opinion or conclusion, whatever is appropriate in the circumstance. Materiality. Just like a normal audit, even in certification, the practitioner should consider materiality. So the practitioner would consider materiality when planning and performing the assurance engagement, including when determining the nature, timing, and extent of procedures, and also when evaluating whether the subject matter information is free from material misstatement. Professional judgments about materiality are not affected by the level of assurance, that is reasonable or limited assurance engagement, because materiality is based on the information needs of the intended users. So just 1 second, sorry. Here, it is very important to note and understand materiality will not vary based on the level of assurance that you are obtaining. Level of assurance depends upon what kind of evidence do you expect to obtain, not based on materiality. Materiality based on whichever level of assurance will remain the same. The applicable criteria may discuss the concept of materiality in the context of preparation and presentation of subject matter. For materiality, there might be quantitative considerations as well as certain qualitative considerations. The qualitative factors which we may consider while determining materiality may include such things as, first, the number of persons or entities affected by the subject matter. How many people or how many entities are going to be affected? Also, the interaction between and the relative importance of various components of the subject matter information, such as report that includes numerous performance indicators. Further, the wordings chosen with respect to the subject matter information that is expressed in narrative form, the characteristics of the presentation adopted for the subject matter information when the applicable criteria allow for variation in the presentation, the nature of the misstatement. For example, the nature of observed deviations from a control when the subject matter information is a statement that the control is effective. So if our statement is going to be that whether the controls are effective or no, then what is the nature of the deviations? Whether a misstatement affects compliance with laws or regulation. If because of this misstatement, any law or regulation has been affected, any non-compliance is there for any laws or regulation, and whether a misstatement is the result of an intentional act or is it unintentional. So that also the practitioner would identify as part of qualitative aspects or qualitative factors to consider materiality. Understanding the underlying subject matter and other engagement circumstances, the practitioner should also make inquiries of the appropriate parties regarding whether they have knowledge of any actual, suspected, or alleged intentional misstatement or non-compliance with laws or regulation affecting the subject matter. So first and foremost, the practitioner should make inquiries with the appropriate party of whether they are aware of any misstatement or any alleged misstatement or any intentional misstatement or any non-compliance with laws or regulation which may have an impact on the subject matter. Further, whether the responsible party has an internal audit function, and if so, make further inquiries to obtain an understanding of the activities and main findings of the internal audit function with respect to the subject matter information. So, if the responsible party has an internal audit function, make inquiries along with the other person, make inquiries also to the internal audit function. Whether the responsible party has used any experts in the preparation of subject matter information. This is very crucial, and the guidance note also gives us criteria that whenever experts are used in the preparation of subject matter, what kind of procedures do we as auditors need to perform, right? So if the responsible party has used any experts in the preparation, identify the qualification of the expert, check the work that the expert has done, also identify what data was supplied to the expert for him to give his for him to prepare the subject matter, and so on. This was for underlying the subject matter, understanding the underlying subject matter. Now, when we talk about limited assurance and reasonable assurance, for limited assurance, the practitioner should obtain an understanding of the underlying subject matter and other engagement circumstances sufficient for it to enable the practitioner to identify areas where a material misstatement of the subject matter is likely to arise. So, in limited assurance, we are only obtaining an understanding of the subject matter to understand where a misstatement can happen. We are not looking at the entire engagement risk. We are only identifying those areas where a particular misstatement may occur, and thereby provide a basis for designing and performing procedures to address the said areas and to obtain limited assurance to support the practitioner's conclusion. All right. Once we identify which areas there could be a material misstatement, provide a basis for designing and performing procedures for the said areas, and to ensure that there is no particular misstatement. Second point of limited assurance only, in obtaining an understanding of the underlying subject matter, also consider the process used to prepare the subject matter. So even when we are giving a limited assurance, or we are obtaining only limited assurance, also consider the process which is used to prepare the subject matter. Coming to reasonable assurance, the practitioner should obtain an understanding of the underlying subject matter and other engagement circumstances which are sufficient to enable the practitioner to identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in the subject matter. Now, this becomes very important. When we see limited assurance, we are only identifying those areas where a material misstatement may occur. When we obtain reasonable assurance, we are identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. That is the risk that what can go wrong in the particular subject matter. Thereby provides a basis for designing and performing procedures to respond to the assessed risk and to obtain reasonable assurance to support the practitioner's opinion. So just like a normal audit, once we identify and assess the risk of material misstatement in accordance with SA 315, in accordance with SA 330, we design our responses to the assessed risk. Similarly, here for certification, when we obtain a reasonable assurance, we should identify and assess what is the risk of material misstatement. Once we identified and assessed what is the risk of material misstatement, we should design our procedures accordingly to ensure and to respond to the particular risk that exists. Also, second point in reasonable assurance, in obtaining an understanding of the underlying subject matter, also obtain an understanding of the internal controls over preparation of the subject matter. If we saw out here in limited assurance, we are only considering the process used. Here, we will understand in detail what was the internal control over preparation of subject matter. Was the internal control existing? Was the internal control operating effectively when the subject matter was prepared? This includes evaluating the design of those controls relevant to the engagement and determining whether they have been implemented by performing procedures in addition to the inquiry of the personnel responsible for the subject matter information. Also, for limited assurance, if we see, based on the practitioner's understanding, the practitioner should identify areas where a material misstatement of the subject matter is likely to arise, and then design and perform procedures to address the areas identified in A above and to obtain limited assurance. So that is it with respect of for obtaining evidence. First, we need to identify where material misstatement may exist. Once we identify, design processes to address those areas above. That's why limited assurance is a little lower level of assurance as compared to reasonable assurance. Now, in reasonable assurance, based on the practitioner's understanding, He shall identify and assess the risk of material misstatement and design and perform procedures to respond to the assessed risk and to obtain reasonable assurance to support our opinion. In addition to any other procedure on the subject matter information that are appropriate in the engagement circumstance, the practitioner's procedures would include obtaining sufficient appropriate evidence as to the operating effectiveness of relevant controls over the subject matter. Like we saw, we had to consider even the internal controls. So when we consider the internal controls, we are also evaluating the operating effectiveness of the relevant controls in the preparation of subject matter. When do we do this? When the practitioner's assessment of wrong, that is risk of material misstatement, includes an expectation that controls are operating effectively. So when we identify the risk of material misstatement, if we are expecting that the controls are operating effectively, in that scenario, we need to evaluate whether controls are actually in fact operating effectively or not. Or when we believe when the procedures other than testing of controls cannot alone provide sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Now, if the what the underlying subject matter is a net worth or turnover, or for example, turnover or export invoices, and those export invoices runs in thousands of invoices, then obviously we would not be performing all the audit procedures of all the 1,000 invoices. In that case, testing of controls becomes relevant, because test only once the controls are effective can we rely and select our sample for few items. So also test the assessment of risk of material misstatement, or procedures other than testing of control cannot alone provide sufficient appropriate evidence. In these two scenarios, you will need to obtain or you will need to evaluate the operating effectiveness of relevant controls. For limited assurance, if the practitioner becomes aware of a matter that causes the practitioner to believe that the subject matter may be materially misstated, he shall design and perform additional procedures to obtain further evidence until the practitioner is able to conclude either that the matter is not likely to cause the subject matter to be materially misstated, or to determine that the matter or matters causes the subject matter information to be materially misstated. So once in limited assurance, when we come to a conclusion that yes, once we become aware of any matter that may have a effect or may be materially and that may cause us to believe that the subject matter may be materially misstated, we will design our procedures to obtain evidence until we are able to conclude that either the subject matter is not affected by this misstatement, or to determine that the subject matter is affected and to conclude accordingly. In case of reasonable assurance, the practitioner's assessment of risk of material misstatement in the subject matter may change during the course of the engagement as additional evidence is obtained. Now, this is just like a normal audit. Even in a normal audit, your assessment of risk of material misstatement may change as and when the audit progresses. Even in case of certification, the risk of assessment of wrong may change because of new evidence that you have obtained. In circumstances where the practitioner obtains evidence which is inconsistent with the evidence on which the practitioner originally based the assessment of risk of material misstatement, he shall revise the assessment and modify the planned procedures accordingly. All right, that was for limited assurance versus reasonable assurance. What should be our audit procedures, how we should identify what is the subject matter, how we should identify the different areas where material misstatement exists. There is a difference, and that is what this guidance note brings out. What is the difference between limited and reasonable assurance? Then description of applicable criteria. The practitioner would need to evaluate whether the subject matter information adequately refers to or describes the applicable criteria. The description of the applicable criteria advises the intended users of the framework on which the subject matter information is based. It is particularly important when there are significant differences between various criteria regarding how particular matters may be treated in the subject matter information. A description that the subject matter information is prepared in accordance with the particular applicable criteria is appropriate only if the subject matter information complies with all relevant requirements of those applicable criteria which are effective. Like we already discussed, net worth can be different in cases of different laws or regulations. So we need to identify what criteria is applicable, which law or regulation is applicable in the particular circumstance, and we need to describe that particular criteria in the report itself. And we also need to ensure that the subject matter information which is given is in compliance and the applicable criteria is appropriate for that particular subject matter information. A description of the applicable criteria that contains an imprecise qualifying or limiting language, such as the subject matter information is in substantial compliance with the requirements of XYZ criteria. This may not be an adequate description as it may mislead the users. Now, when we say substantial compliance, what do we mean by substantial compliance? Right. So either we have obtained reasonable assurance that everything is compliant, or we have obtained assurance and we know that something is not in compliance. Ultimately, forming an assurance, opinion, or a conclusion, the practitioner should form an opinion or a conclusion about whether the subject matter information is free from material misstatement. An opinion in the case of reasonable assurance, a conclusion in the case of limited assurance. In forming the opinion or a conclusion, the practitioner should consider the sufficiency and appropriateness of evidence obtained and an evaluation of whether uncorrected misstatements are material, either individually or when aggregated. Most of the practitioners' work in forming the assurance, opinion, or conclusion consists of obtaining and evaluating evidence. If the practitioner is unable to obtain sufficient and appropriate evidence, a scope limitation exists. So if we are unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence, either we should express a qualified or disclaim an opinion, or we should withdraw from the engagement wherever withdrawal is possible under the applicable laws and regulations. Preparing the assurance report. The assurance report should contain a clear expression of the practitioner's opinion or conclusion about the subject matter. Where the subject matter information is made up of number of aspects, separate opinion will be provided on each aspect. Now, this is important. Where the subject matter includes different number of aspects over which we have to give an opinion, our opinion should we should give different opinion for different aspects. All such separate opinions or conclusions do not need to relate to the same level of assurance. It may be possible that couple of aspects or couple of opinion we will give on reasonable assurance and one conclusion we may give on limited assurance. The guidance note does not require a standardized format for reporting on all assurance engagement. It just identifies the basic elements of the assurance report which is to be included. Assurance reports are tailored to the specific engagement circumstance. So this particular guidance note does not give that this is the format that has to be followed. This particular guidance note just says that these are the elements which are to be included in the assurance report at a bare minimum. Assurance report content. All right. Now we move on to the actual, just 1 second. Yes. Sir, am I audible? Okay, great. Now we move on to the actual content of the assurance report. Now, yes, I was just saying that. Just 1 second. Yes, now visible? Perfect. So, moving on to the assurance report content, like we saw that this particular standard does not say that this is the exact format you have to use. This guidance note just gives us what all content need to be included in the assurance report. First, we need to give a title, very basic, a title which indicates that this is an independent assurance report. Further, there needs to be an addressee. Who are we addressing this particular report to? Third, an identification or description of the level of assurance. What level of assurance we have obtained? Are we going to obtain reasonable assurance or have we obtained limited assurance? We need to also identify and describe what is the subject matter and wherever appropriate, the underlying subject matter information. Now, identification and description of the subject matter information and when appropriate, the underlying subject matter may include, for example, the point in time or period of time to which the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter relates. So when we give a particular subject matter, we should also give the point in time in which the subject matter is relating, or to a period of time. For example, it may be for the year ended, or it may be as on a particular date. And the name of the responsible party to which the underlying subject matter relates. For which party are we giving this particular subject matter? Just 1 second. I think my video is getting messed up. Yes. Further, an explanation of those characteristics of the underlying subject matter or the subject matter information of which the intended users should be aware has to also be given, and how such characteristics may influence the precision of the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter against the applicable criteria or the persuasive of available evidence. I think my video is acting up, so I'll just shut my video and I'll continue. Yeah. For example, the degree to which the subject matter information is qualitative versus quantitative, objective versus subjective, or historical versus prospective. Further, if there is any changes in underlying subject matter or other engagement circumstances that affect the comparability of the subject matter information from one period to next, all this needs to be mentioned as part of the report. Further, we also need to identify the applicable criteria. The practitioner identifies the applicable criteria against which the underlying subject matter was measured or evaluated, such that the intended users can understand the basis for the practitioner's opinion or conclusion. See, if we give only the subject matter in the report and we do not give against which criteria, this is like saying that, okay, in the certificate we are presenting net worth certificate, the net worth of a company, but net worth as per what? So net worth as per SEBI regulations, net worth as per Income Tax Act, net worth as per Companies Act. That particular criteria needs to be given. If we don't give this criteria, then the user will not have a frame of reference to draw that from where are we obtaining this particular net worth, how have we computed the net worth. It may be relevant in the circumstances to disclose the source of the applicable criteria and whether or not the applicable criteria are embodied in law or regulation or issued by authorized or recognized bodies of experts. So if it is the applicable criteria is mentioned by some law or regulation, we need to mention that in the report. Also, measurement or evaluation methods used when the applicable criteria allows for choice between a number of methods. Further, any significant interpretations made in applying the applicable criteria in the engagement circumstances also need to be disclosed, and whether there have been any changes in the measurement or evaluation methods used. Next point included in the report should be, where appropriate, a description of any significant inherent limitations associated with the measurement or evaluation of the underlying subject matter against the applicable criteria. So if we have identified any inherent limitation, we need to disclose those as well. Where the applicable criteria are designed for a specific purpose, a statement alerting the readers to this fact, and that as a result, the subject matter the purpose. Now, this is very important. In the opening para itself, or somewhere, we need to mention that this applicable criteria is suitable for the purpose for which we are giving the certificate. If we are using this particular criteria, if you use this particular criteria for any other purpose, it may not be suitable. So if you look at a net worth from the perspective of net owned funds criteria for an NBFC, right? So when we are computing net owned funds criteria for NBFC only to comply with regulations, it is applicable only for that. Now, if another reader is looking at that net owned funds and saying that, okay, based on this, I will determine whether this NBFC is a going concern or not, it may not be suitable for any other purpose. That way. The practitioner may also consider it appropriate to indicate that the assurance report is intended solely for the specific users. If required, the practitioner can indicate that this particular assurance report is intended for these specific users only. This may be achieved by restricting the distribution or the use of the assurance report. We will see this when we go through the illustrative formats. Further, the practitioner will write a statement to identify the responsible party and to describe their responsibilities and practitioner's responsibilities. Who is the responsible party? what are the responsibilities of the responsible party, and what are the responsibilities of the practitioner. Also, a statement that the engagement was performed in accordance with this guidance note, statement that the firm of which the practitioner is a partner has applied SQC 1, so and so. A statement that the practitioner complies with independence and other ethical requirements. So, like we saw, the ethical requirements which were required by the code of conduct, all those requirements have to be complied with, and the practitioner will also mention that in the certificate. Then, an informative summary of the work performed as the basis for practitioner's opinion has to be mentioned. In a limited assurance, the summary of work should state that the procedures performed in a limited assurance vary in nature and timing and are less in extent than for a reasonable assurance engagement. So if we are providing a limited assurance engagement, this disclosure will become compulsory. So in any limited assurance engagement, please mention that the procedures performed will vary compared to reasonable assurance, and the procedures performed are in less extent compared to a reasonable assurance. And consequently, the level of assurance obtained in a limited assurance engagement is substantially lower than the assurance that would have been obtained in a reasonable assurance engagement. So these 2 points will need to be mentioned when you are giving an opinion in or when you're giving a conclusion as per limited assurance and not as per reasonable assurance. The practitioner's opinion or conclusion, it may be appropriate to inform the intended users of the context in which the practitioner's opinion is to be read. And what is the context in which his opinion has to be read? The context is to the underlying subject matter of which the user should be aware. All right. In a reasonable assurance engagement, the opinion is generally expressed in a positive form. So how do we express an opinion in the reasonable assurance? Let us see. When expressed in terms of the underlying subject matter and the applicable criteria, we may say, in our opinion, the entity has complied in all material respect with so and so law. Or when expressed in terms of subject matter information and the applicable criteria, we may say, in our opinion, the statement of net worth is properly prepared in all material respects based on the so and so criteria. Or when expressed in terms of statement made by the appropriate party, then we can say, in our opinion, the appropriate party's statement that the entity has complied with XYZ law in material respects has been fairly stated. So this is how you would give in a reasonable assurance. In a limited assurance, often we give in a negative form. So if you see, in a limited assurance engagement, the conclusion, not an opinion, a conclusion is expressed in a form that conveys whether, based on the procedures performed and evidence obtained, a matter has come to the practitioner's attention to cause the practitioner to believe that the subject matter information is materially misstated. So when expressing an opinion in terms of when expressed in terms of underlying subject matter and applicable criteria, we may say, based on the procedures performed and the evidence obtained, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that the entity has not complied. So like I said, here we are giving the statement is in a negative form. We are saying nothing has come to our attention that makes us believe that the entity has not complied. When expressed in terms of subject matter information and the applicable criteria, we will say, based on the procedures performed and evidence obtained, we are not aware of any material amendments that need to be made to the assessment of KPIs. This is linked to that key performance indicators which guidance note was recently released. When expressed in terms of a statement made by the appropriate party, we may say, based on the procedures performed and evidence obtained, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that the appropriate party's statement has complied with the law is not fairly stated. So this is how you would report in case of a reasonable assurance out here, and here in case of a limited assurance. Then the opinion or conclusion in point 2 or 3, as in here and here, should be phrased using the appropriate words for the underlying subject matter and applicable criteria given the engagement circumstances, and need to be framed in terms of the underlying subject matter and the applicable criteria, the subject matter information and the applicable criteria, or a statement made by the appropriate party. So basically what they're saying is that in any engagement for the certification, whatever opinion that you are phrasing and whatever the conclusion you are phrasing, the words used have to from the words used, the user should be able to figure out what was the subject matter and what was the criteria. Also, forms of expression which may be useful for underlying subject matters include one or more combination of the following. For compliance engagements, you may say the entity is in compliance with, or the statement is prepared in accordance with. For engagements, when the applicable criteria describe a process or methodology for preparation or presentation of subject matter information, you may say properly prepared. For engagements, when principles of fair presentation are embodied, you may say it is fairly stated. Fine. And when the practitioner expresses a modified opinion or a conclusion, the assurance report should contain a section that provides a description of the matter giving rise to the modification, and a section that contains the practitioner's modified opinion or a conclusion. And in the guidance note, last three things are obviously the practitioner's signature, the date when he's signing, and the place. One thing which is not mentioned in the guidance note, of course, this had become applicable after the guidance note had come, is the UDIN. Anytime you are signing any certificate, UDIN number needs to be mentioned. So ensure that UDIN is also mentioned based after the signature in any certificate. Assurance report prescribed by law or regulation. If the practitioner is required by law or regulation to use a specific layout or wordings of the assurance report, then the assurance report should refer to the guidance note only if it includes at a minimum each of the elements as identified as above. So whatever elements we have seen from A to P, only if it includes all the elements can we say, and can we give a reference to this guidance note in that report which is prescribed by law or regulation. Unmodified opinion or conclusion, it should be expressed in an unmodified opinion. The practitioner should express an unmodified opinion or a conclusion when the practitioner concludes, in the case of a reasonable assurance engagement, that the subject matter information is prepared in all material respects in accordance with the applicable criteria, or in the case of limited assurance engagement, that based on the procedures performed, no matter has come to the attention of the practitioner that causes the practitioner to believe that the subject matter is not prepared in all material respects. So the statement is in a negative form, but where we give a limited assurance. In case of modified opinion or conclusion, we will say the practitioner would need to express a modified opinion or a conclusion when a scope limitation exists and the effect of the matter could be material. He may give a qualified or disclaimer of opinion. When the subject matter of the information is materially misstated, he may give a qualified or an adverse opinion or a conclusion. Now here we are just seeing what are the examples of qualified, adverse, or disclaimer of opinion. In the case of a qualified conclusion, based on the procedures performed and the evidence obtained, except for the effect of the matter described in basis for qualification conclusion section of our report, nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that the appropriate party statement does not present fairly in material respects. So just like how we give qualifications for a normal audit, here also we give an except for qualification. So except for the matter prescribed in basis for qualification, nothing has come to the notice. In the case of adverse opinion, example would be, because of the significance of the matter described in the basis of adverse opinion or conclusion section of our report, the appropriate party statement does not present fairly the entity's compliance with so and so law. In the case of disclaimer of opinion, because of the significance of the matter described in the basis for disclaimer of opinion or conclusion section, we have not been able to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence to form an opinion or a conclusion on the appropriate party statement. Accordingly, we do not express an opinion. So these are just examples of if we had to modify the particular opinion, then how would we give that particular opinion? A qualified opinion should be expressed as being except for the effects or possible effects of the matter to which the qualification relates, which we have already seen above. Most important, if it is not documented, it is often said that it is not done. So it is important for us to document everything that we have been doing and to document the engagement letter as well. If we see, this is fine. Documentation. the practitioner should prepare on a timely basis engagement documentation that provides the record of the basis for the assurance report that is sufficient and appropriate to enable an experienced practitioner having no previous connection to understand the nature, timing, extent of procedures performed, to understand the results of procedures performed, and significant matters arising during the engagement, the conclusions reached, and significant professional judgments made. So the documentation should be maintained in such a way that any practitioner who has no connection with the engagement, just by looking at the documentation, should come to know what are the procedures that we have performed, what are the results of those procedures, and what are the significant matters arising, and what are the conclusions reached for those significant matters. If the practitioner identifies any information that is inconsistent with the practitioner's final opinion regarding a significant matter, the practitioner should document how the practitioner had addressed that inconsistency. And as per SQC 1, the practitioner shall complete the assembly of engagement file in not more than 60 days after the date of assurance. This is standard. All right. The completion of the assembly of the final engagement file after the date of assurance report is just an administrative process. When you are completing the engagement file, when you are completing the assembly of the final engagement file, you will not involve performing new audit procedures or not involve drawing new conclusions. However, certain changes which are allowed are deleting or discarding superseded documentation, sorting or collating or cross-referencing some work papers, signing off on completion checklist, and so on. All these changes are allowed, but other than that, you will not obtain any new information. The retention period for assurance engagements ordinarily is no shorter than 7 years. So for 7 years, you need to obtain, for 7 years, you need to maintain or retain the particular documentation. All right. After this, let us first look at few illustrative formats and how in the guidance note only the statements are presented. The first illustration is practitioner's report for turnover on net worth or net profit or working capital or any similar engagement pursuant to a tender document. Now, just by looking at the heading of the illustration, let us try and figure out what is the underlying subject matter and what is the criteria. The subject matter out here would be turnover, or would be net worth, or would be net profit or working capital. That is the subject matter. Now, what is the criteria? The criteria to which you have to match the subject matter is the tender document. The criteria would be mentioned in the tender document. Let us see one by one. This is the addressee and title is given out here. After that, the report is in accordance with the terms of engagement letter, agreement date, or engagement agreement dated so and so. So here, you will always need to give a reference to the engagement letter. Therefore, it becomes very crucial to first have an engagement letter in place before accepting the assignment. Then in the second para, the accompanying statement of annual turnover for the financial year ended so and so. Here they've specified the period, and the statement of current assets or current liabilities or working capital on any specific date contains the details as required pursuant to compliance with the terms and conditions contained in the so-and-so clause, whichever clause it refers to, of the tender document. So here, what have we done? We have matched the underlying subject matter. We have matched the underlying subject matter with the criteria, which we have initial for identification purpose only. So here what may have happened that this here we are just giving a main report as per the guidance note, and additionally there might be an annexure which the practitioner would initial for documentation purpose. Management's responsibility. There should be a separate section in the final report which includes management's responsibility. It should say, or it should specify, that the preparation of the statement is the responsibility of the management of the name of the company, including preparation and maintenance of all accounting and other relevant supporting records and documents. This responsibility includes the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal controls relevant to the preparation and presentation of the statement, and applying the appropriate basis of preparation and making estimates that are reasonable in the circumstances. So here we are saying that the preparation of the statement is responsibility of management. Further, Maintaining and preparing accounting records is also management's responsibility. This also includes management's responsibility for designing, implementing, and maintaining internal controls for preparation of the statement. All this needs to specifically come out in the management responsibility section. Now, when we see the point number 3, that is a generic statement that generally management is responsible for so and so. When we look at point number 4, here there's additionally mentioned that the management is also responsible for ensuring that the company complies with the requirements of the tender document. Here we are saying that we as practitioners are not responsible to check that, or we as practitioners are not responsible to ensure that management is complying. Management is responsible for ensuring that they comply with the particular tender document itself. I'm sorry, my camera is just not working. I'm just trying a lot of things. All right. Then, pursuant to the requirements, practitioner's responsibility. Now, one point I want to make it evident here. The word practitioner will be mentioned when you are not the auditor of this particular entity. If you are the auditor of the particular entity, here you will not mention practitioner. You would mention auditor's responsibility. All right. So that distinction needs to be clear whenever we give certification. The word practitioner would come only when it is the when you are not the auditor. If you are the auditor of the entity, the word independent auditor or auditor would come. Auditor's responsibility. Pursuant to the requirements of the tender document, it is our responsibility to provide a reasonable assurance. So here, if you see the format, here they've given that we are obtaining reasonable assurance. Whether the statement of annual turnover has been accurately extracted from the financials, the amounts in the statement in respect of current assets and current liabilities have been accurately extracted from the audited financials of the year ended so and so. So it is important to mention whether you have extracted the same from audited financial statements or you are extracting the same from unaudited financial statement. And so same thing for net worth also. Further, we are mentioning as part of our responsibility, practitioner or auditor's responsibility, the audited financial statements have been audited by us, on which we have issued an unmodified opinion based on so and so date. Our audits of these financial statements were conducted in accordance with standards on audit and other authoritative pronouncements. Those standards require that we plan and perform the audit to obtain reasonable assurance. So this is just basic of the audit that they would have done. We conducted our examination of the statement in accordance with the guidance note on reports on certificate for special purpose. So here we are saying that we have complied with this particular guidance note. In the next line, we are saying that the guidance note requires that we comply with ethical requirements as well. Further, we will also have to mention that we have complied with the relevant applicable requirements of the standard SQC1 as well. Ultimately, you will be giving the opinion. Now here we had obtained reasonable assurance. So based on our so how would we report in the case of a reasonable assurance? Based on the examination as above, we are of the opinion that the amount in the statement in respect of annual turnover, current assets, and current liabilities have been accurately extracted from the audited financial statement of so and so date. Amounts forming part of working capital have been accurately extracted on so and so date, and that the computation of working capital and net worth in the statement is mathematically accurate and is in accordance with the method of computation set out in clause so and so of the tender document. So here, what have we done in point number 2? They have compared the underlying subject matter, which was the computation of net worth, with the criteria based on which it was supposed to be computed. The criteria was the tender document. So they have matched the underlying subject matter with the criteria. Like we saw that we can also give restriction on use, wherein we will say that this particular certificate is addressed and provided to board of directors solely for the purpose of the company to comply with the requirement of tender document and to submit a statement, and should not be used for any other used by any other person or for any other purpose. Here, this becomes important because it should not happen that somebody else looks at this certificate and relies on this certificate for the purpose of seeing, checking or evaluating whether the entity is a going concern or whether the entity is not a going concern. The purpose of the certificate was never whether the entity is a going concern. The purpose was only for the particular tender document. And we can write the statement, accordingly, we do not accept or assume any liability or any duty of care for any other purpose to or any other person from whom this certificate is shown or in whose hands it may come without prior consent in writing. Then you will have your signature date, place, and UDIN number mandatorily. This was the first illustration. Coming to the second illustration. Sorry. In the cases of branch offices or liaison offices, we as auditors also need to provide an additional certificate called annual activity certificate, which is in addition to our normal report. So the guidance note has given a specific format for the annual activity certificate, which we may follow. Here, addressee is mentioned. So based on the circumstances of the engagement, the addressee would also change. The authorized responsibilities of the name of the branch and address where they are there. Independent auditors annual activity certificate for the branch of so and so company. And then we will write first para, this certificate is issued in accordance with terms of agreement. We'll give a reference to the engagement letter. In para number 2, you will mention that the liaison office with PAN number so and so, whose UIN number is so and so, was established to undertake certain activities specifically permitted by the RBI via its approval letter. Now, when we are putting the approval letter out here, we are automatically giving the criteria which we have for which we are giving a certificate. Authorized representatives responsibility. Here we are mentioning what is the responsibility of the authorized representatives. Further, in the next part, we will mention what is the auditor's responsibility. In the auditor's responsibility, whatever, checking with master circular, audited financial statements, and then general notes will always come. 3 general notes will always come. First general note would be compliance with this guidance note. Second note will be compliance with code of ethics. And third note will be compliance with SQC1. These notes have to come, which has been mentioned out here in point number 6 and point number 7. Ultimately, we will give our opinion based on the audit of financial statements for the year ended so and so, and the information and explanation provided to us. We are of the opinion that the particular branch office has undertaken only those activities during the period from so and so date to so and so date, as have been specifically permitted by the Reserve Bank of India. Our underlying subject matter was what activities that the liaison office has taken. The criteria was what has been permitted by Reserve Bank of India to this entity. So here again, in the opinion para, what have we done? We have matched the underlying subject matter with the criteria. And restriction on use para will come, which will mention that this particular report is only used for, has to be used only for this particular purpose and no other purpose. After your signature place date, UDIN number would also come. Coming to one more illustration. After this illustration, we will move on to the few case studies, which are different types of certification which a company may come to us as practitioners to provide. Illustration 3, auditors report in the manner of utilization of funds of SEBI LODR regulation. Again, the title is given, this is given. Initial report will be issued in terms of your agreement dated so and so, and initial para is given wherein you are mentioning what is the underlying subject matter and mentioning what is the criteria against which it has to be evaluated. Management's responsibility will be mentioned. What is the management's responsibility? What is the auditor's responsibility? In the auditor's responsibility, if we see point number 7 and 8, the standard points will always remain. And ultimately, opinion. So here it is a fair presentation. What have they said? Based on the information as above and the information and explanation provided to us, in our opinion, the statement is in agreement with the audited financial statements for the year ended so and so, and fairly presents in all material respects the manner of utilization of funds, including funds utilized for the purpose other than those stated in the offer document. Ultimately, restriction on use will also come. Fine. Just 1 second, 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Oh, yes. Am I audible? Great. Okay. Yes. This was a case study that I thought we can do. Here, the case study says that we need to prepare a certificate for a company to claim SEIS benefits as per enclosure to form ANF 3B. Now, if you have done any certificate for DGFT or for as per this particular enclosure form, you will know that the format of this enclosure form is fixed. We cannot modify this particular format at all. It has been decided in the past that this particular format cannot be modified. So in this scenario, first you need to identify what is the applicable criteria first, and also identify what is the underlying subject matter. Now, here we are saying that a certificate of chartered accountant is going to be provided, and I have examined the prescribed register and so of this particular company for the period so and so. We will certify that bills, invoices, forward inward remittance certificates, bank realization certificates, etc., and evidences have been examined and verified. Relevant records relating to total expense payments in foreign currency has been verified by us. Services for which benefit is claimed do not include ineligible services. This has also been verified by us, and neither I nor my partners are associated with the entity concerned, etc., has also been verified by us. So this is something that we are going to give out here. So if you look at it, what will be the underlying subject matter and what would be the criteria? For this, the underlying subject matter could be what is the earnings in foreign currency, what are the expenses in foreign currency, and what is the net amount to be claimed for this particular incentive. The criteria, we will evaluate the underlying subject matter against whether it is covered in this particular service as specified in the foreign trade policy, whether export revenue or expenses are as per the DGFT guidelines, and whether these particular services include any ineligible services or not. So that is the criteria against which we have to match the subject matter. We can have so and so opening para. We, the CA firm, the auditors of so and so private limited, hereinafter referred to as company, having its registered office as so and so, are issuing the certificate to certify that services are provided to their clients in connection with invoices against which they are claiming service export benefit scripts are covered under management consultancy as per Appendix 3D of the foreign trade policy. Now, we have been informed that the said certificate is to be submitted by the company to the DGFT for obtaining SEI scripts. The accompanying annexure to the certificate contains the details as required. One thing is not mentioned in this opening paragraph. All right. If you see the thing that is not mentioned, the reference to engagement letter is not mentioned here. That is missing. That is something that you should have that should have been added to the opening paragraph. Looking at the management's responsibility and auditor's responsibility, the management responsibility, the accompanying annexures to the certificate, including creation and maintenance of all the accounting and other records, supporting documents, contents, etc., is the sole responsibility of the management. The management is also responsible for designing and implementing and maintaining internal control relevant to preparation and presentation of the statement and applying the appropriate basis for preparation and making estimates that are reasonable. Further, this was a generic, the first para. Second para says, the management is responsible for ensuring that the company complies with the relevant provisions of RBI relating to the said regulation with the requirements of export document and provides all the relevant information to the Director General of Foreign Trade, that is the DGFT. So first, there is a generic that the statement which the management is giving is based on that is the management's responsibility. Management is maintaining the books of accounts. Management is responsible for designing, implementing, maintaining internal control. Second para comes to very specifically to this particular engagement. So for this specific engagement, what is required will be mentioned in the second para of the auditor's responsibility. Our responsibility for the purpose is to provide a limited assurance. See, here we have mentioned that we are providing a limited assurance on whether the amount of foreign trade as reflected in the annexure have been accurately extracted from the books. Then general paras will come. We have conducted the examination in accordance with this particular guidance note. Second general para will be that the guidance note requires that we comply with the ethical requirements. And third general point will be we have complied with the relevant applicable requirements. Since we are giving a limited assurance out here, automatically it will not be an opinion, it would be a conclusion, wherein we have given conclusion in this way. Based on the procedures performed, evidence obtained from the audited books of accounts and other relevant records of the documents, and according to the information and explanation provided to us, we certify that nothing has come to our attention that makes us believe that the financial information contained in annexures A to D to the certificate have not been compiled from the audited books of accounts and other relevant records of the company. The said annexures have been stamped and initialed by us for identification purpose. Right? Since this was a limited assurance engagement, we gave a conclusion, not an opinion. If you see properly, one thing which was supposed to be included out here but was not included would be a statement saying that limited assurance is a level of assurance which is little bit lower than reasonable assurance. That statement should have also been mentioned, which has not been mentioned out here. And of course, the last para would be the restriction in use, that this is only solely for this particular purpose and no other purpose it should be used. All right. Second case study. Here we are required to prepare a statement or a certificate for a company to submit the certificate on list of shareholders and directors to the State Industry Promotion Corporation of Tamil Nadu, which is SIPCOT, as part of the documentation to be submitted by the company along with the application for transfer of lease. And this was the format which was given to us. And they said, the management said that we require this particular certificate in this format itself. This has to be sent. So we said, all right, we know that other thing cannot, we cannot modify this particular statement. So what we would do, we would give the certificate as per this particular guidance note and include this statement as part of the annexure to that certificate. So underlying subject matter would be list of directors and list of shareholders. Now, there was no criteria mentioned. So criteria was that it is for the submission of documentation to SIPCOT. Now, where do we have to verify this list of shareholders, or what is the meaning of list of shareholders or directors? That is a general definition as per the Companies Act. We'll have to take. The opening para, we are issuing this certificate in our capacity as independent practitioner. Here, if we are not the auditors, we would put the word, generally we would use the word as practitioner and not auditor. For Mrs. XYZ, having its registered office in so-and-so place, in response to letter from the company dated March 12, requesting us to certify the statement of list of shareholders so-and-so as of March 19. We have been informed that this certificate is to be submitted by the company to the SIPCOT as part of documentation to be submitted by the company along with application for transfer of lease over SIPCOT land. So again, here in the opening para itself, we have identified the subject matter and we have also identified the criteria based on which the subject matter has to be measured. In the management's responsibility, the first para is the specific point, where the compliance with the requirements of the application to be filed is the responsibility of the management. And however, preparation of maintenance of accounting records, etc., is also their responsibility, which also includes compliance with all relevant laws and regulation. And second, third para out here is a generic para, which says that management's responsibility includes the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control, and so on. Here, since we are not the auditors, generally we can use the word practitioner, and we have used the word practitioner's responsibility. If you are not the auditor of any entity, then here do not write that we are the independent auditors. We are not auditors only for this specific engagement. The particular entity has come to us, so we will become the practitioner and not the auditors of the entity. The general statements will always come, guidance note, this particular guidance note, and ethical requirements and SQC1. Opinion, since this was a reasonable assurance, we are giving an opinion and not what do you say, not a conclusion out here. And of course, restriction on use has been mentioned. And what we had done, we had given this particular opinion and we had mentioned the statement has been initialed by us for identification purpose. We attach the statement to this certificate and you can sign initial this particular statement out here in the firm name. Last case study. This was a certification. Generally, NBFCs require this certification whenever foreign direct investments for half year ended September, as per master directions of so and so, by reference number so and so. Now, for this particular certification, we understood what was the subject matter and what is the criteria required. The subject matter was statement of compliance with FDI investment for the particular NBFC. The criteria was given in these different master directions and consolidated FDI policy. So based on these criteria, we had evaluated the subject matter and given a different type of given the assurance, whichever relevant assurance. If we see out here, in the first para, we identified what are we supposed to evaluate, which is the underlying subject matter. And we have also given what was the criteria against which we were supposed to make this evaluation. After this, management's responsibility standard, auditor's responsibility. If we look here, you can also report like this. Our responsibility is to provide reasonable assurance on the matters specified in 6A and 6B and a limited assurance on the matters specified in 6C. So two matters which were written out here, A and B, we've given a reasonable assurance, and for C, we've given a limited assurance as specified in para 6. We will come to para 6 also. 4 and 5 is the general auditor's responsibility, which we have to mention. When we look at para 6, here we are specifically saying that 6A and 6B is reasonable assurance and 6C is in fact limited assurance. So if we look at the wordings also, the company as prescribed under master direction has complied with the minimum capitalization norms on an ongoing basis. In 6B, the particulars of the accompanying statement is in agreement with the unaudited books of accounts. But however, when we gave a limited assurance, we have changed the wordings and we have written nothing has come to our attention that causes us to believe that the activities of the companies for the 6 months are not restricted to the activities permitted under so and so. So this is how you can give, where we saw that different aspects can have different types of assurance. So if that is the case, then in the same opinion, you can also have limited assurance as well as absolute assurance. I think that is it from my side. Anilji.
Thank you so much, sir. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you. My camera is acting up.
No issue, sir. No issue, sir. It was wonderful deliberation. Sir, I have certain questions. If you allow, can I raise the questions?
Yes, sir, please.
Yes, sir. So first question is relating to one member is asking, can you just member is saying we all know there is a difference. What is the meaning of report and certificate? But while as far as the auditor is concerned, what precautions he has to take for report and certificate, means differentiating report and certificate?
See, basically a report can be when you are obtaining limited assurance. Whenever you are obtaining limited assurance, avoid using the word report. Avoid using the word certificate. In limited assurance, you are not obtaining a high level of assurance. At that point of time, you can use the word certificate in case of reasonable assurance. But otherwise, certification generally intends to say that everything is 100% correct. But as we saw in this particular presentation, the guidance note itself tells us that the engagement risk cannot be reduced to zero. So if the engagement cannot be reduced to zero, we cannot obtain absolute assurance. So that's how you can distinguish. Like, maybe if you obtain reasonable assurance, say that you can certify, but in case of limited assurance, don't use the word certify.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, what precautions should we take while signing provisional or projected figures?
So, see, provisional figures. So, I think there are two answers to this. First, precautions for provisional or unaudited figures, right? For historical information only, if we are giving unaudited figures, just check the last few days, the accounting entries that have been recorded in the last few days. Is there any substantial increase in sales or substantial increase in expenses, or any substantial purchases or substantial sale of fixed asset? Because as we cannot take a blanket what do you say, blanket assurance that okay, because we are saying that it is unaudited, we are not responsible at all. No, we are responsible to look at the basic accounting data of that particular entity. So that is what you can look at from a unaudited perspective. For certifying of or verifying the prospective financial, you need to look at and you need to consider the past trends as well. It cannot happen that without considering the past trend, you are only giving a report on prospective financial information. In that scenario, it might be difficult to then justify that why this particular increase happened or why this particular decrease has happened, so on and so forth.
Yes, sir. So my another question is, if every certificate to be issued required engagement letter, non-repetitive, if certificate attestation fee need to be billed separately as per the committee guidelines or as per the guidelines on minimum fees, or can be clubbed in other audit fees or no separate billing? Will it be contrary guide itself? The certificates has to be including minimum required clauses relating to the management responsibility.
I think yes, like you will have to bill it, you will have to have a billing, whether that billing is included as part of the audit fees or that billing is separately done, but billing will be required. You cannot not make any billing for that particular certification.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, Rule 4 of the NAFRA provides that authority shall protect the public interest of the investors, creditors, and other associated with the companies or bodies corporate governed under the Rule 3 establishing high quality standard of accounting and auditing. What additional precautions need to be taken by auditors to safeguard himself or herself to comply with the expectations of NAFRA, etc.?
I think major part where a lot of us are lacking is the audit documentation. Many times it is not that we have not done any work, it is just that we have not documented any work. If you also read any of the NFRA orders, majorly they are saying that this is not done, this is not done, this is not done. But whereas the auditor comes back and says, well, we had done this, but we had just not documented. So one thing where we can improve is in our documentation process. Try and obtain, I think there are certain automated documentation softwares also available. So try and obtain certain softwares, and if not, at least even on Excel, you can maintain what procedures you had performed, what was the evidence that you had obtained, what was the difference, what were the significant matters, and how you arrived at the conclusion. I think that the only way is to have sufficient documentation.
Yes, sir. So on what type of documents or information we should not issue certificate? Can you please guide us or put some light on this?
I think, see, one is though, as specified in SAE 3400, like for prospective financial information, you cannot use unless you have sufficient basis, etc. That you cannot issue a particular certificate. Further, there are many, any other certificate that we cannot issue. I'm not aware of any certificate that we cannot issue, honestly, as long as it's related to accounting and auditing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, utilization certificate issued in case of government expenditure or government grants, what type of assurance is expected from the government authorities or guarantee units where reporting formats are already prescribed?
See, I think again, this is a misconception. The assurance, the expectation of the intended user will not determine what assurance you obtain. the evidence that you obtain will determine what kind of assurance. So depending upon what evidence you expect to obtain, you can give a limited assurance or you can obtain reasonable assurance. So let's not base it on what the intended users want, but base it on what what kind of evidence is available.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So thank you so much, sir, for such a wonderful deliberation. And on behalf of AASP of ICI, I extend my heartiest thanks towards you for sparing your valuable time. And again, we have talked about this topic, and on a very shorter notice, we have approached you, and you have acceded to our request. So thank you so much once again for acceding to our request and guided our members as well as enlighten all of us on various intricacies relating to the topic, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.